Hello and welcome to our first webinar of 2021. This year, we have an exciting lineup of webinars for you, so we'll be sharing more information on the rest of them in the coming few weeks. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. If you've attended our webinars from last year, thanks for joining us again. So let's get started. Today's webinar topic is effective corporate scientific communication, strategies to support your corporate narrative and maximize the real world impact of your data. Our presenter today is Criterion Edge's president, Lori Mitchell. Lori is founder and president of Criterion Edge, a global medical and regulatory writing and safety services firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety and pharmacovigilance management, and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory and medical writing solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, she is a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is a published author and holds a Master of Nursing from UCLA. Before we begin, let's run through some quick housekeeping items. If you experience any technical difficulties in the duration of this webinar, please go ahead and use the chat option on your Zoom menu bar. Send us a message and we'll do our best to fix it for you. If you have any questions about any of our content today, you don't have to wait until the end. There's a Q&A option on your Zoom menu bar. Type in your questions at any point in time and we'll run through as many of them as we can. If we don't get to your question, we'll get in touch with you afterwards. Otherwise, you always have the option of always emailing us at consult@criterionedge.com. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on our website afterwards. But if you are registered, you will also receive an email with the recording as well as a copy of the slides. Lastly, I want to encourage our attendees just to hang on a little bit longer after we finish our webinar today for a super short 2-question survey. Your feedback really helps us in creating content that matters to you. Before I turn it over to you, Lori, I want to take a quick second for a poll question. It should be showing up on your screen right about now. And our first question here is, what are you hoping to gain out of today's webinar session with Lori? This is a multiple choice question, so you can select more than one response here that matters to you. So I'll just give you guys a few seconds to give us your responses. See if your response is still coming. Is it just giving you a few more seconds here? All right. It looks like, we're going to be hitting all of these points. So it looks like, most of you are going to get what you need, what you're hoping to get out of this, this webinar today. So thank you for sharing your responses. With that, Lori, I'm going to go to the next slide and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We've got a great crowd today. Thank you for attending, and let's get started. In our session today, this presentation will provide a practical and high-level overview of a scientific communication plan and the positive impact a well-developed and well-executed plan can have on market awareness and company goals. The key elements of an effective scientific communication plan, both from a top-level strategic perspective and at the project level, are reviewed and discussed. Actionable tips are provided on how to improve data-driven clinical and scientific communications to maximize market impact. At the end of this presentation, you'll know the positive impact effective scientific communications can have on your organization, types of scientific communication materials and communication channels, the high-level elements included in a scientific communication plan, and how to tailor your messaging at the project level for maximum receptivity and impact. First, let's talk about the importance of effective scientific communication to your organization. I acknowledge that scientific communication is a broad term used in different contexts, but for our purposes today, it is a defined multi-step plan to communicate a company data-driven research, therapies, and diagnostic or treatment modalities to the external scientific community and corporate marketplace. The definition used here is adapted from a 2017 report entitled Communicating Science Effectively, a Research Agenda, published in the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And I place the reference for your interest at the bottom of this slide. The types of scientific communication materials that are discussed in this webinar are meant for a clinical or professional target audience, not consumers, not lay people. For example, one common type of consumer-driven communication is TV commercials. So that isn't something that we won't be talking about that type of communication. Today, though, we will focus on data-driven written materials that are meant for professional audiences. And this means, of course, that all information presented in those types of scientific communication materials must align with information presented in approved regulatory documents, such as the company's market approval applications, instructions for use, or investigators' brochures, just to name a few. Therefore, successful scientific communication must include multidisciplinary planning, combining the input and talents and points of view from your regulatory, clinical, marketing, and quality colleagues, as well as critical input from your company's key opinion leaders. And as with all effective communication, there should be a clear understanding of the target audience, the intended audience. A scientific communication plan should incorporate goal-oriented strategies, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And of course, as with all plans, it helps that if it's effectively executed. What are some of the basic building blocks of a corporate scientific communication plan? At the highest level, you must identify the various types of communication that will be developed and the communication channels utilized to disseminate the information to a wider audience. For example, the types of communication listed here: manuscripts, abstracts, poster presentations, podium presence support, such as at conferences, speaking engagements, slide presentations, panel discussions, and data-driven clinical insight summaries, which are usually small, short summaries of clinical investigation data delivered directly to clinicians. So the types of communication channels, for example, would be that these types of communication materials would be distributed through, would be peer-reviewed journals, professional or medical society conferences, and as I said, direct to clinicians. This is to support the public-facing corporate messaging, and the communication channels are the proposed methods for making that information and message public. What are the positive impacts to the corporation that can be derived through effective scientific communication efforts? A well-executed communication plan supported by robust, well-developed written materials can support the overall corporate narrative. That is what the company wants to communicate to the scientific community in public-facing comments, materials, and presentations. It can highlight the research and scientific leadership of the company, and certainly support key opinion leaders in the development of published manuscripts and strategic presentations at key conferences. All of this can come together to raise market awareness for the company's products, drugs, and devices, and ultimately drive sales. I mentioned earlier that scientific communication efforts should be goal-oriented. I want you to keep these desired outcomes in mind when building a scientific communication plan. They should inform and be incorporated into your planning discussions and goal setting. We'll revisit this later in the presentation. Next slide. Now let's look at some of the high-level and critical elements that should be incorporated into any scientific communication plan. Here are presented the foundational and overarching elements of any plan. We won't get deep into details on the scientific communication plan, as that's a topic for an entire webinar on its own. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll keep it high level here and focus on critical elements to help drive our conversation today. Every plan should have a clear purpose. What is the plan intended to accomplish? That's what I mean by a purpose statement. The why and the what is your goal. Why do you want to do this? And what is ultimately your goal? What do you want to accomplish? Of course, all goals should be measurable, and that's no different here. However, you want to measure success, whether it's an uptick in sales or an uptick in website hits, or clinicians contacting the company for more information on your product. Goals can be measured in lots of different ways. So be thinking about how to document goal achievement and not just say, hey, it went well, yay for us. Plans should include timelines, the long-term program level timelines, if you will, and the interim project-specific timelines for each project included in the plan. Let me give you an example. The company will be rolling out the final clinical investigation data on a new, innovative, state-of-the-art cardiac stent, anticipating FDA and EU approval within the next 18 months. That is an example of long-term program-level timelines. You've got an overarching timeline that is lengthy, and within that span of time, you're going to want to execute the specifics of your plan. So breaking timelines into those project specifics, the company would identify which key conferences they would target for their KOLs to either present in keynote sessions, breakout sessions, panel discussions, or poster presentations. In parallel, the plan would include the coordination of manuscript publication in peer-reviewed journals and other project-level activities. Each one of these projects has its own short-term project-level plan and timeline, which in turn fits into the overall program-level plan and timeline. Keep in mind that project-specific timelines are usually driven by the availability of final data. So the scheduling of key conference appearances is dependent on the readiness of the data and the desired target audience. And speaking of target audiences, you would, of course, want to target specific, in this case, in the case that we're talking about, you would want to target specific interventional cardiology conferences, meetings, and journals. These are the channels that you would identify in your plan to use to deploy your speaking and written assets. We want to identify those journals for submission of 2 manuscripts and 1 abstract. These conferences and meetings for more podium present type of activities, such as presentations, panel discussions, KOL-led breakout sessions, or poster presentations. These are some of the questions you would ask yourself. Which journals, where, when, which conferences, who, where, when, all matter. All of these activities, all of those activities, of course, require written communication to either support them in the case of panel discussions even, and presentations, or in the case of manuscripts, to be presented to the larger audience via a published medium. So you can see that the type of project level written material needed depends on the intended target audience and the channel to be used. So to sum it all up, an effective scientific communication plan should focus on strategic benchmarks and goal achievement, just as we talked about. What are your strategic benchmarks? You're going to get that manuscript published in Target Journal before the XYZ conference in September. You're going to schedule your KOL to speak at a key conference in December. These are the type of timing issues that you have to grapple with in your plan? What are the goals? Each project should have its own set of goals. Besides, at the plan level, each project should have some goals measurable as well. Remember to include that multidisciplinary input into the plan. The more eyes, the better. Marketing, quality, regulatory, clinical, and certainly your KOLs who are going to be directly involved and have their own inherent interests in mind as well, don't forget. Remember, your marketing colleagues in particular must walk a fine line between what is scientific communication, usually written by very experienced scientific medical writers, such as those of us at Criterion Edge, versus other types of communication materials that are put together by the marketing group. Those materials are not as data-driven. They may be written in a language at the level of a lay audience, not as specific, but still have to align with language and regulatory approved documents, such as the IFUs and IBs, for example. Does the plan provide project level specifics? In other words, are there project plans within the overall scientific communication plan? So you'll see the call out box where I say avoid vanity projects. Say, for example, let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. You've got perhaps internal CMO or a KOL is very keen on presenting a topic or a paper that he or she would want published, and in order to get their name out there. All projects included in your plan should pass the same pressure tests as all other projects. Does the project make an impact? Does it help achieve specific goals? Or is it really more of a pet project that does not advance corporate messaging or corporate goals? So I just wanted to call that out sometimes, is that everything in your plan and every project in your plan should have a specific purpose and should move the needle, if you will. So last thought, remembering back to a few slides ago about the impact of effective scientific communication on the corporation. Let's go back and see at the top of your slide. Let's see that plan for an impact. So then ask yourselves these questions. Does your plan now raise market awareness, like we talked about a few minutes ago? Does it highlight corporate scientific leadership? Does it support your KOLs? Does it drive market adoption and sales? And does it support or advance the corporate narrative? Jessica, I think you've got a poll question now.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, I just want to take a pause here for another quick question. We'll have in just a moment, you'll see another question come up on your screen. The question is, how well developed do you feel are your current scientific communications plans within your organization? And you can just select one of the options. There's a few more responses coming in, a couple more seconds. All right, it looks like the majority of you feel like you have a fairly well-developed plan, but definitely can use some improvements or need to think about having a plan in place. So we certainly hope by the end of this presentation, you will feel more empowered to either improve your plans or send us your questions, and we can talk more about how to help you get those things set up. I want to remind attendees to continue sending your questions using the Q&A option into the chat, and we'll definitely, we have some time carved out at the end specifically just to answer your questions. All right, with that, Lori, I'm going to give it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Let's pivot here now from the overall plan and get down to those project level specifics. So these are the project level checks. Remember, the plan has an overarching long-term goals and timelines, of which the building blocks or tools of that plan are specific events or projects. Now we're at that level: the event, the project, the conference, the manuscript. Schedule a proactive double check before each individual project is scheduled to launch, not the week before, but at least a month before launch time. Do a readiness check. Let's take a manuscript, for example. Ask yourself and ask your team, are the data ready? Are the data finalized? Do you have tables, figures, and listings available to be able to incorporate into the written project? These are basic double checks to confirm prior to project launch. I'm sure you're all familiar with these kinds of checks. Asking the team, are the critical inputs needed for the project going to be available as planned? Double check with your biostats colleagues for any potential problems that can be mitigated now. Double check with your regulatory that the IFU or IB language is solidified and there are no late breaking changes that might be expected. These are the kinds of questions to ask. That if these kinds of things do happen, they tend to derail timelines pretty quickly. Another readiness check should be, are the supporting documents final? So I just alluded to that. For example, the old bugaboo that many of us writers have dealt with before is what I just mentioned. The IB or the IFU is currently being revved, which can create significant slowdowns and or extra work to revise the written materials within the project with the new information. Pressure to incorporate last-minute revisions within any document is a QC nightmare and a recipe for mistakes. So you would want to avoid those kind of last-minute fire drills as much as possible. Another example is if you're writing up a presentation piece that will highlight an upcoming clinical investigation, and for example, the protocol is not finalized, or it is being revved as well, and you want to get some late-breaking information in there. These two examples are just some examples of how data unreadiness can hijack a project and threaten timelines. So look at all of these different types of inputs and other supporting source documents to be sure the final versions and not the drafts are going to be available. And next, do you have needed people resources? Who's going to do the work? You or someone else? And is that person available? Do you need outside vendor support? And if so, that takes time to locate and bring on board. So build that into your plan and get started early. You've heard me talk about time throughout this presentation, and the call-out box draws attention to it again. Adjust your timelines when you're doing your readiness checks. Adjust timelines if needed or possible, and never lose track of your project timelines. So let's talk about something that people might not know a lot about: message framing. Because they don't know a lot about it, to a scientific writer or a scientist, message framing, that can sound a little squirmy. So I'd like to discuss framing here. This is a real thing. There is a lot of information and even articles written about framing. Framing is a little about storytelling, and I don't mean storytelling as in telling fibs. I mean powerful messaging that gets across your point. So let's dig a little deeper into this. First, let's talk about what message framing is. The description in that light blue box is taken from the same NASEM reference from earlier in the presentation. It says, emphasizing one attribute. Let's listen to this and think about it. Emphasizing one attribute or over another to compress the messaging for receptivity, effectiveness, and audience engagement. I can't think of a better way of describing the struggle scientific writers have sometimes wading through the enormous amount of data that is included in a report or a manuscript that must be included, actually, in both internal and external written materials, such as clinical reports, CSRs, in the device world specifically, clinical evaluation reports, not to mention manuscripts, posters, and presentations. How do you, as a writer of those documents, choose what to emphasize? This is not about manipulating the data or the analyses. That's not what framing is. It's about drawing the audience's attention to what is important and highlighting that. So as I say here, many factors vie for the attention of the audience. Complexity of information, dense data sets that are difficult to track, multiple messages, and plenty of red herrings, to name just a few. What do I mean by a red herring? Some of you may know it's a kind of a logic term that is applied to irrelevant distractions. A look over here type of thing. It's something that looks important, but it's not. By the way, politicians are masters of effective deployment of red herring messages. There are a lot of potential red herrings in data. The reader or the listener may say, oh, I'm going to concentrate on that. That kind of information the reader may focus on that doesn't make an impact or is actionable in any way. It's a red herring, and a red herring is another word for a distraction. Effective framing helps to emphasize the important and draw the attention away from the unimportant. Again, draw the attention away. This is emphasizing one message over another, not eliminating a message. Because the data takes us to where it takes us, and you can't always avoid, poor outcomes or disappointing results. Those must be presented as well and discussed. But if there is good news to report, you want to make sure that it is highlighted. Talented and good writers can do this almost naturally. I want to say here that we, Criterion Edge, is a vendor, and we as a vendor have worked on many, many data-driven projects, both in internal reports and external-facing materials, where framing was needed and appropriate to focus the message. And we rely on and always work closely with our clinical partners to achieve the right message with the client. So this is really a dual responsibility for framing is really a dual responsibility. You as clients or the owners of the data know the messaging very well, but the person know what message you want to get across, but the person writing it may need your guidance and focus to help get that framing right. Finally, let's think back to the earlier slide about the impact of effective communication. Framing, when done well, can help your project or presentation make a splash, thus increasing the impact of the project on the target audience, which thus increases your chance for goal achievement. All right, taking all of this into account, what we've just said, let's go to the next slide. It's one short, little simple one. If the project does not have the desired impact or achieve its target's goals, don't blame the audience. In other words, if the project did not make that splash that you hoped for or was intended, it's probably not the fault of the audience. It's probably the fault of the messaging or the data, or it just is. Go back to the drawing board and make adjustments for the next project. Final thoughts for your consideration before we move on to our questions. So again, I'm going to say if anything I've said prompts a question, please jot it down now so that we can get right to your questions, because there's often so many that we can't finish them all. So please take a few moments to do that while we're finishing up with our final thoughts. Thank you. To make a project work, I think we might all be familiar with this analogy taken from the Good to Great book by Jim Collins. Get the right people on your team and put them in the right seat on the bus. I think many of us have heard that. The fresh eyes of an expert can help identify gaps, can help sharpen and frame the message, review, and offer useful feedback and insight. Your internal team are all subject matter experts on the device, and thus the documents, data, and information needed to write any project. They each have their role to play in their specific specialty, be it regulatory affairs, clinical affairs, quality, research and development, and so on. But who among your team are the right people to be assigned the task of preparing, supporting, and pushing along a written project to completion, a written project that's part of your overall scientific communication plan? Which leads to the next point, and again, borrowing from Jim Collins' analogy, let's assume you have great people, which I'm sure you do, but are they each sitting in the right seat of the bus for the purposes of the project? Are their skills and talents deployed effectively to the right project task? For example, Sally is a great scientist, very knowledgeable on the device or drug, and a great analytical thinker. But does she have the right skills to effectively lead the project writing team? John is very experienced in regulatory affairs, and his guidance and leadership in this area is invaluable to the team. Maybe he seems to be the best fit to prepare the needed presentation slides, and he might have the bandwidth to take on the task as well. But can he write? Is he a good analyzer of data? Does he have advanced PowerPoint skills in order to build those presentation slides? This is the time to honestly assess the resources you have on hand, identify gaps, and find ways of filling those gaps. Select the right people, put them in the right seat, and where gaps exist, whether it's in bandwidth or focused expertise, act early to fill those gaps. My final point is that it takes a village to pull together successful, well-written, impactful written projects. Partnerships are critical to the success of any task. Partner with your internal cross-functional colleagues across departments. Form partnerships within your own team, and partner with great external resources, such as a consultant or vendor, if needed. Great partnerships are greater than the sum of their parts and can lead you to those great outcomes. Because we're a writing company and time is our master, I thought I would wrap up this session with final thoughts about time. There are two measures of time represented here, and I want you to think about it. On the left, the number of calendar days remaining to the final project due date. On the right, a representation of the days, hours, and minutes needed to complete the task. When a certain deliverable is coming due, I always assess the time remaining from these points of view. In other words, how many hours are needed to complete the work and how many calendar days do we have to do it? So before we move to our Q&A session, I'll leave you with these humble bits of advice. Expect the unexpected. Anticipate roadblocks, they're guaranteed. If you think a certain writing project will take 4 weeks to complete, double that. If you're sure that everything will be ready for the project to start on November 1st, plan on a start date of November 15th. My final advice to prepare for any writing project is straightforward. Do not underestimate the importance and the need for time. Thank you today, everyone, for your time and attention. I really am looking forward to your questions. I'll hand it back to Jessica now. Jessica?
Thank you, Lori. We hope at this point you understand the key elements that should be included in every scientific communication plan, how to double check for project level readiness and timelines, the impact of effective message framing on your target audience, as well as the importance of time and appropriate resources. If you have any questions, I want to remind everyone to continue sending us those questions in the Q&A. And I also want to remind you that even after this webinar, you're always welcome to reach us for a consult@criterionedge.com to learn more about our services or to schedule some time to talk to Lori if you wish to. The next thing I'll do, Lori, is set up our question screen for you so we can start our Q&A. Just let me know once you're able to take a glance at it, see if you can see our first question.
Oh, I can. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica, and thanks for that first question. Jessica, are you going to read the question for folks?
Yeah, let me read it
you.
out just in case someone's joining us by the phone today. Our first question is, our team is challenged by wearing multiple hats and we struggle to keep up with external communications on a timely basis. How do you continue to deliver medical communications regularly regardless of workload?
Well, there are a few thoughts that I have in mind for that. I think a realistic, when you're making, if you were to sit down and even sketch out a plan, maybe you don't even have a plan within your organization about these external communications. Sketch out what's possible given your internal resources, given your cadence of data and your cadence of what your overall organizational goals are. So first of all, a realistic level setting, realistic expectations. Upper management wants to accomplish all of these things in the next year and a half as far as communications go. All right, what's it going to take to do that? And what's the budget for that? I think that's another, that's a practical question. What's the budget for that? Because if it's more than what your internal team can take on and still manage their other responsibilities, maybe you have only one writer available on your team and that person does lots of other writing. So this, I would say step one is look at the scientific communication plan, even if you're just, back of the napkin, putting it down. Look at your resourcing, look at your budget, and go back to upper management saying, we may need more of a budget, we may need more resources, or we may need to, lacking those two, we may need to pare down this ambitious communication plan. So that would be the way I would go about that. And then if there's no paring down the plan of the external communications, then negotiations are in order with your management with regards to resourcing and budget. So that's, you probably are thinking, well, we've tried all that. You probably have, but it's still, it's an ongoing struggle. And I don't have really any other thoughts other than maybe getting creative with combining or leveraging documents to increase efficiency. For example, a poster presentation and a oral presentation can be built pretty quickly out of a manuscript, or a CSR. So you're looking at all those inputs and saying, let's put all these together at once so that we don't need to do it piecemeal and revisit something a month later when our team has moved on to something else. So certainly leveraging approaches and messaging and data across multiple sources into 2 or 3 projects built out at the same time might be another way of doing that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Lori. The next question here is, someone is asking, how do you choose optimal target journal for publications?
Well, as I said earlier, maximum impact, understanding the target audience, understanding the readership of those of that target journal, making sure that it's peer reviewed, and who are those peers? Are they, in other words, are they key opinion leaders and key leaders in the particular field in which the manuscript or abstract is targeting? So I would, in other words, go for the best and see if it can be accepted, if it would be accepted, and then build out from there. If you can't get into the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, and you need to go to other appropriate peer-reviewed journals that are in need of content. So understanding the target audience is how would you choose optimal target journals for publication? What is their target audience? And does it fit with your message and plan? Thank you.
Okay. Next question up is, how do you strike a balance between the voice of science versus the point of view of the audience? I assume they mean target audience, intended audience of this the deliverable to our corporate colleagues, marketing. It's highlighted here.
I see. So there's, you know, the voice of science, i.e. the data and the message, the data and the analyses and what the data tells us. That always is the driving voice. It must be. Science is science, and data is data, and analysis shows us what it shows us. So putting it that way, then what we can't do is say things that are obviously they're false or misleading or even softly misleading. We have to be, this gets back into that framing, is that the data takes us where it takes us. So how do you balance that? Well, with framing, essentially. The voice of science, which is the data, are the data, and the point of view of the audience. So who's your intended audience? In this case, since this question references marketing, so there's two forms of marketing that I'm familiar with. I'm not a marketer, but we've written marketing pieces, and the marketing side that we as a company are familiar with are what many of our clients call clinical marketing, where that marketing is meant for scientific communications to clinical audiences. So if your marketing colleagues are focusing on the end audience of clinicians, for example, and I referenced earlier clinical insight pieces. I don't know if everyone on the line knows what those are, but we've written those before, and they're usually very short, 2-page, very, very compact summarizations of, say, maybe even interim data or certainly final data of a particular outcome of a clinical investigation or a post-market clinical follow-up or some other late-breaking type of information that the company wants to highlight. And the MSLs who go out to key clinicians across the country, and they would take these clinical insight pieces in their discussions with the key opinion leaders and the clinicians across the country within their district. And that would be another voice or a point of view of the audience. Now you're talking directly to a clinician to help drive their understanding and hopefully their adoption of your device or product. So it is a balance. And I hope I answered the question. I know that was kind of long, but it's a balance of what you emphasize and what you don't emphasize, getting all back to that framing.
Thanks, Lori. Next question up is, can you discuss the importance of TLFs?
So TFLs or TLFs, depends on who you're talking to, are tables, listings, and figures. And those are important because they would be the biostats validated outputs from a biostatistician, a SAP program, and the biostatistician. They align with the statistical analysis plan, the SAP, and they show the data in its, if you will, raw form, in that there's no spin or framing or analyses started yet on the data. That's what the written materials are for. The TFLs are the starting point of the analysis. So getting those right And what does that mean, getting them right? Well, of course, biostatisticians want to get, I've never met any other person on this planet that is as exacting as a biostatistician. I actually love working with them, because if a comma is out of place, they're more than happy to fix that. They want everything to be perfect on those TFLs, at least the biostatisticians I've worked with. And that in turn, as part of the SAP, the plan for them, is that there is the way the TFLs display data in a certain way. The tables look a certain way. What are the columns? What are you highlighting? What are you pulling forward as the important or key data? So the importance of the statistical analysis plan on the ultimate output and the visual impact and the impact of the TFLs, which then impacts your written materials, all of those are linked together and are very important.
All right. Thanks, Lori. Next question is, how can I quickly expand my writing resources for an unexpected and important publication?
Well, that I guess that matter. I think one thing that matters there is what is defined quickly. As maybe unexpectedly, maybe I'll take it from the point of view of unexpectedly expand my writing resources for an unexpected or an important publication. So quickly, of course, is a time function, and you can expand your writing resources. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job as a vendor if I wouldn't say you can engage with a company like Criterion Edge or an independent contractor and bring in external resources, is what I mean by that. To engage quickly to help pull together these unexpected over the fence, is like what I like to call them, over the fence projects that management is tasking you with. You're either going to have to find those resources internally and clear that, the right seat on the bus person, clear that person's schedule and have them go at it, bolt them to their desk until it's done, or you're going to quickly bring on some sort of an external partner.
All right. We have time for more questions, so I'm going to keep going. Our next question, can you talk a little about what documents, data go into developing a manuscript?
Depends on the topic of the manuscript, most certainly. Most definitely depends on the topic of the manuscript. So I'll take I'll take a common topic. Your organization has final data, or maybe an interim data cut, or has reached a primary endpoint of your ongoing clinical trial. And you're going to do a data cut on those data, finalize them, analyze them, and present them in a manuscript. That's probably also going to go along with, that manuscript's also probably going to be bolted along in your scientific communication plan with a KOL getting in front of a presentation at a key conference. And there might be all kinds of other types of materials because you've reached a primary endpoint. You want to get the early word out there. So what kind of documents and data would go into developing a manuscript like that? Well, certainly the TFLs we just talked about. They're a key part of that. And I'm going to also assume that there's probably an interim report being written within the company itself as an internal facing document, an interim CSR, for example, that's being developed. So in that CSR, there would be the background, there would be the methods, and certainly for a clinical trial and an investigation, there's always the protocol or the SIP, and where you can pull background and methodology and so forth from. The protocol goes more into the details of the analyses that are intended analyses. You can pull information from there, and those are really your source documents in a nutshell for developing a manuscript like that.
Okay. We have another question here. What does a synoptic CSR mean?
So a synoptic CSR, I'm going to try to, I just looked this up actually about 2 weeks ago. So I'm not going to, it actually has a definition and I'm not going to say it right. So I say, first of all, you can probably Google it and find out, but let me say for the purposes here, it is certainly a shortened CSR. It is meant to include minimal analyses and also the most important data. Sometimes it's almost tabular in nature and there's very little analyses or only top level analyses. And there are instances where a synoptic CSR is actually acceptable from a regulatory standpoint. It can be negotiated with your regulatory agency and partners to create a synoptic CSR with these data, with this type of information as an interim type of a submission. So that's the best I can do off the cuff. But I did look it up and it was enlightening to find out exactly. I found it somewhere without too much trouble about what are the key elements of a synoptic CSR. So good luck finding that. Thanks for that question.
All right. Next question. When you have a project that didn't have the desired impact, how much do you adjust for the next project, fine tune versus overhaul?
Let's see. When you have a project that didn't have the desired impact, which means it did not meet its, to me, that means it did not meet its goals. Desired impact being one of those goals, that it didn't drive like more hits on your website, or it didn't drive questions or other clinicians reaching out, whatever those goals were that you defined, it didn't meet, it fell flat is what I'm hearing from that. That's what I'm going to assume by that. How do you adjust for the next project? Well, first of all, do a lessons learned and a post-mortem on why you think it did not have the desired impact. Was it, did you target the wrong audience? Was it the wrong message? Well, let me see. Was it the wrong type of a written project? In other words, would it have been better presented as a poster rather than a manuscript? Would it have been better orally presented at the podium as part of a presentation versus published? So question your first of all, your methodology for getting the word out there. Question your target audience, thus the communication channel that you use. Did you use the wrong journal? Did you target the wrong conference, for example? Was your messenger maybe not the best? And that means either written or, in the case of oral, an oral presentation. All of these things. So do a postmortem on all of that. And then, based on what you find, does it require a fine tune, or is it an overhaul? I would say fine tuning is more of a, we can do better next time, but it wasn't a dud. I think an overhaul feels like you would overhaul it if it fell really flat. And then it's like I was saying earlier, back to the drawing board.
All right. I want to bring this question up because you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. Someone asked here, how do you get marketing to equally value voice of science with voice of customer? Projects are also chosen based on what the customer wants, but sometimes they don't know what is possible. Thus, the voice of science should lead in this person's opinion. Your thoughts?
Projects are also chosen based on what the customer wants. Yes, so I'm kind of digging into the question. Projects are also chosen based on what the customer wants. Yes, I think that's an element. Customer wants or is interested in, maybe it would be another way of saying wants, interested in what you think the customer is interested in or they express an interest in. but sometimes they don't know what they're going to hear, right? Thus, the voice of science should lead in this person's opinion. Yes, as I said earlier, the voice of science always leads. It always is the master of the message. But as we talked earlier, messages can be emphasized. And then you go back to thinking about what do you think that customer is interested in and what they might want to hear and or be interested in hearing or engaged. And then you tailor your scientific message to try to spark an interest or make that splash. Those are my thoughts on that.
All right, we have about 3 more minutes left, so I'll try to squeeze in as many more questions as we can. We've had a few questions on message framing, so I just put one here, but maybe you can talk more about it. This individual is asking, please walk through an example set of facts to selecting a frame and the final message. And they're familiar with message framing in the context of public health.
Ooh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this one pretty quickly. Please walk through an example of a set of facts in selecting a frame and the final message. I'm probably not going to be able to get that granular this off the cuff like this. So I apologize to this person. I'd love to talk to them more about this afterwards. But again, I'm going to just revisit what I said earlier, which is that there is a set of facts. You know, I'll just take a device. I'll take the cardiac stent. I'll try to do this. I'll take that cardiac stent example we gave earlier. Is that that there are benefits to that cardiac stent. You always want to emphasize that, like the design benefits. What are the new design improvements, and what are their intended benefits to that? You have to be careful about benefits, but that's the subject for another, stating benefits, that's a subject for another webinar. But you want to be careful about framing expected, say, benefits and expected risks based upon that information within the IFU in the case of a medical device. Is that you do not want to get out ahead of stating and framing and getting frisky, if you will, about framing certain types of data ahead of what's published in your IFU. You cannot go out there in the marketplace and start making unsubstantiated claims. This is the best cardiac stent for doing X. That's an example of a claim that that the data doesn't necessarily back up. So that's not a fact. You have to stick with the facts and avoid those subjective terms and straying from what is the bounds of what's written in the IFU. I hope I helped with that. I probably didn't much, but because it's a complex conversation. That's why it's a kind of a dual responsibility between the writer and the client.
Thank you, Lori. So we are out of time for today. So I just wanted to say thanks again, Lori, for going over all these questions with us. I know we have a couple more that we didn't get to, so we'll certainly reach out to you afterwards. If you have more questions on our content today or want to learn more about our services, you can still get your free consult or free meeting with Lori for joining us today. Again, our information is consult@criterionedge.com. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and will be available soon on our website. We'll also send it out to you in an email with a copy of the slides as well. Lastly, when you sign off, you'll be asked to fill out a really quick 2-question survey for us. Your feedback is really valuable, so please let us know how you enjoyed the session and give us your honest feedback. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today and for your wonderful questions.
Hey, Jessica, this is Lori. I want to just break in real quickly. I see in the chat box, and a shout out to Mitchell for posting a link to a synoptic CSR. Thanks, Mitchell, for having my back there. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mitchell. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us and your questions. Everyone stay safe and have a wonderful day. Thank you.